but the movement's left a permanent mark on US politics.
So a weekend of intensive campaigning ahead for Barack Obama and Mitt Romney for those few votes which could decide who goes to the White House. Well, let's talk to American journalist Daniel Costello and also Timothy Stanley, a conservative commentator and an expert in American history. Thank you both for joining us. If I can begin possibly with you, Timothy, having listened to that report from Hannah there. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose the long-term effect of the Tea Party is that the Republicans are still shaped by a narrow, possibly nationally unrepresentative Christian right. You've got an unpopular incumbent, unemployment at around the 8% mark. If it wasn't for that, this election would have been there for the Republicans taking, wouldn't it?
I don't think I would define the Tea Party as Christian right. That's certainly a cultural dimension of their politics, but really their emphasis is upon fiscal policy. Look, your report got it absolutely right. What happens in American history is you get these third party or movements that emerge apparently from nowhere. They dominate the national story for, 2, 3, 4 years. Then they get integrated into a party, and the party looks a little bit more like them, and their obvious independence and influence ebbs away, but they're still very, very powerful. Now, the Tea Party was popular. The Tea Party is one of the reasons why the Republicans swept to control of the House in 2010. And it's the Tea Party rhetoric, it's class war rhetoric, it's the idea that Washington is far away and out of control and big government's got out of control. That kind of thing is still probably a vote winner. I would say that Mitt Romney is probably more of a drag on the ticket than necessarily conservatism or the Tea Party. But the Tea Party, here to stay in terms of influence and has dramatically reshaped Republican philosophy.
Well, let's take you up on that point that it's possibly Mitt Romney who has been the drag on the ticket. Daniel, has that been your perception?
I mean, I don't think that Mitt Romney has been a particularly strong candidate, and I do think that he's the biggest drag on the ticket. But to address Tim's point about the Tea Party, I do agree that a big tenet of the Tea Party is fiscal conservatism, but another big tenet is social conservatism. And one of the things that I think has taken away some of their power in American politics has been some of this strict conservative ideology, especially in key races, even in this election, in certain Senate races in particular. They've come out and had quite conservative opinions that I think have pushed away mainstream voters. So I don't fully agree with that opinion, and I think it has held back the power of the Tea Party, who otherwise would be more of a force in this election.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, the one saying everybody here in the UK knows about American politics is it's the economy stupid. And obviously those fiscal policies are critical. But then, of course, there's the great unknown. And I wanted to know what you both made about the effect of Superstorm Sandy, because at the beginning it very much seemed like President Obama might have received a boost from his handling of that. But with many people still struggling for electricity, for power, do you think there might be a backlash on that? If I could ask you that question first, Timothy.
Well, if the backlash does take place, then it's going to take place in heavily democratic states. So its impact on the election will be very limited, places like New York. Will it have an impact upon how Obama's leadership is seen throughout the rest of the country? That I'm not so sure about. He's had one or two great photo opportunities. But if these petrol lines start developing, if people start demanding more from the government, if people start talking about failure, then perhaps it could be something which comes to epitomize the stagnation of Washington, D.C., and the sense that Barack Obama isn't quite on top of what the presidency requires.
That's interesting, because it certainly seems to have re-energized Barack Obama. Obviously, we all remember his performance in the first debate, but seeing him back out there at the rallies yesterday, he seemed a different man. What do you make of his performance, Daniel, yesterday, and what does he need to do in the next few days?
I mean, I think Sandy, if it has an effect, I think it's a quite small effect on the overall race. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt President Obama that a week before a presidential election, he came off looking incredibly presidential. But I think most of the independent voters and swing voters have probably made up their mind at this point of the race. And so I think that overall Sandy's probably a small point. If there's a reason I think that Obama seems energized, is that I believe that he knows, and likely the Romney camp knows, that he's very likely to pull this off. He may lose the popular vote, and that's up in the air, but I don't see a possibility for Governor Romney to win the Electoral College, just as the math isn't in his favor. So I think that's the thing that probably has energized the Obama campaign in the last few days.
Timothy, I'll let you come back on that.
You can judge what's going to happen on the basis of two things, either the polls or the grand narrative. When it comes to the polls, you're absolutely right. They're neck and neck in the popular vote, but Obama has a 4 to 5 point advantage in the key swing states. So it looks like a narrow Obama victory. But personally, I keep on coming back to this issue of the narrative. The economy is not good. Unemployment is pretty much the same as it was when Obama came into office. There have been attacks on US embassies overseas. There's a sense of disarray when it comes to American foreign policy. And a lot of Americans are really hurting. And you have to ask yourself, with that kind of record, should a guy get re-elected regardless of what a handful of polls say about a handful of states?
Daniel, I can see you itching to come in on that.
No, I mean, I do agree with that. I mean, I don't think that President Obama has run a particularly strong campaign. I don't think that he's had a particularly strong presidency, and he has a very weak economy. And that makes it all the more surprising that the Republicans couldn't capitalize in this election. To take the narrative point, I actually think that I would flip that a little bit. I think it's quite surprising that the Republicans, considering all this, have not won this election. What I think that says is that this has not been a great tactical election for them. But more broadly, I think the Republican Party has a question coming up as early as next week of how do they modernize, how do they build and be successful at the start of the 21st century. I think the failure of the Tea Party and I think other things have leave them with a lot of questions about how do they win? What happens in 2016? What kind of candidate could they bring to the table? Who's electable? And I think they have some big questions to answer before they could pull this around next time.
Well, will we be seeing a repeat of the Bush-Gore 2000 photo finish? Gentlemen, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but for now, Daniel Costello, Timothy Stanley, thank you for joining us. Of course, don't forget to let us know what you think about any of the stories we're covering today. You can email us at